Since 1972, the McIlvaney Financial Group has been a conservative, contrarian investment firm. With that mindset, they have created a multifaceted approach to portfolio management, offering a wide array of services including hedging through precious metals, wealth advising, a unique short fund, and an excellent educational resources. We have had David McIlvaney on our show multiple times because we respect his outlook, viewpoints, and recommendations. You really need to take advantage of the free portfolio risk analysis and bank safety ratings they're offering our listeners. Just call them at 1-800-525-9556, and you will be put in touch with an advisor with years of experience who can take 15 minutes and give you a much better understanding of what true portfolio diversification is. Again, call them at 1-800-525-9556 and benefit from their expertise. Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burek of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest and a friend of mine in real life. He's author of Financial Judo and host of the Kennedy Financial Weekly Show with his brother John. Phil Kennedy, thank you for joining me again.
Well, thanks for having me back on, Jason, on this Good Friday. Wall Street is closed, but Wall Street for Main Street is open.
Yes, we are open, and we are doing a show because people will, if they don't have a good family relationship, they will want to listen to something to get a little mental break.
No doubt. Well, the holiday weekends can be tough, but I'm sure they're going to cope with your show, and we're going to make it fun.
Yeah, either that or drinking. So, I was listening to talk radio, sports radio when I was driving around before I came back here, and yeah, I was hearing a lot of people have plans to drink a lot this weekend. So, anyways, let's talk about President Trump. So, in your opinion, Trump's almost been there for 3 months. Has President Trump done anything you like so far?
No, he hasn't, but I'm not surprised. You know, it's funny. Tom Woods, man, I respect. I listen to his podcast all the time. He's been quoted now as saying, basically every president eventually becomes John McCain. And it took Trump less than 100 days to do so. Never before have we seen someone flip-flop so quickly. I read somewhere on Facebook that he's like the presidential version of Dory from Finding Nemo. His short-term memory is really just that. So he hasn't done anything I've liked. I think the world is now going to become a much more complicated place as a result of his decisions. I mean, obviously, it looks like he's now surrounded by liberals and neocons who are advising him on a daily basis. Any glimmer of libertarian hope is now long gone. And I think, you know, most people who said they were Ron Paul supporters, Gary Johnson supporters, but were voting for Trump and actually believed in his message are now regretting it. And almost like, you know, many other things in life, one of the ones that comes to mind is maybe college and things you did or people you associated with. You're not going to admit it in adulthood. And I bet you there's a lot of Trump voters out there who will never admit it because they're so ashamed of what he's already done. But in my opinion, the quote unquote Trump rally is over. The optimism will begin to fade. The market in dollar terms may continue to go up, but I think now in gold terms, it's going to go down. The Dow gold ratio, the dead cat bounce that we saw over the last 5 years will discontinue, and now we'll start to see gold appreciate against the market and eventually hit that 1-to-1 mark or less that I've been talking about for quite some time. And in my book, I think we're going to eventually see it go below 1. And really, that's what really matters. And of course, that's why your audience listens to this show, because they understand real economics and sound money. And, you know, they're not going to be fooled by, you know, Dow 30,000 or Dow 40,000 because gold is going to be $20,000 an ounce or something like that. And those market figures aren't going to matter. The other thing I want to say is, you know, lots of saber rattling with this president, you know, already bombed Syria and Afghanistan and probably going to bomb North Korea in the next week. Who knows? But this is not good for financial markets. Financial markets like stability. They like to be able to look out and discount cash flows. And it's difficult to do that when you may have the commencement of World War III. So That's another reason that I'm disappointed. And then finally, he has backtracked on everything he campaigned on. He now endorses Janet Yellen. He thinks the dollar is too strong. It looks like healthcare reform is going to go away, and we're also not going to see taxes reduced. So this president is already an unmitigated disaster in less than 100 days.
I cringed, Phil, when people started comparing Donald Trump to Ron Paul before he had taken office or just as soon as he had taken office. And, now that we're about 3 months in, I think I can say with confidence that not only has the swamp fought back, the swamp is winning. And through leaks and sabotage, Donald Trump's presidency has been turned into futility. So yes, he has his executive orders, which, are extremely dangerous, but anytime he needs the help of either side of the aisle, either neocons or rhino Republicans or hardcore Democrats, anytime he's trying to get their help on things for corporate tax cuts or repealing and replacing Obamacare and putting in a sensible plan, they're just going to screw him over, drag their feet as long as they can on things, make him look bad rather than themselves look bad.
You're right. And I think, honestly, I read a Zero Hedge article today that the same, professor who predicted Trump's win is now predicting he'll be impeached. And that wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised by that. I think they're going to get him right in their crosshairs and then turn on him when the time is right. And, obviously that'll be bad for the Republican Party and all the effort that was put into, someone who was outside of the machine and he was going to drain the swamp. All of that will have been lost, and it's already lost at this point. So let's be honest. Yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see him impeached even within his first 2 years.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. I mean, the mainstream media with the Russia stories and the other things that they've been running, the goal, the people who are hardcore Democrats, who are mainstream Democrats that have been controlling government policy for so many years in the bureaucracy here in DC and elsewhere, they called themselves the resistance when Trump won. It was so ridiculous, because they were the mainstream people for so long. Now they're the labeling is so dystopian and Orwellian. I think Trump, unfortunately for him, he hoped to be Ronald Reagan. He's probably going to end up being more like Herbert Hoover.
Right. Yep. And we'll have Bernie Sanders as president for the next 16 years or something crazy like that. They'll find a way. They'll make it happen.
I don't know. Maybe Ivanka in 12 years will run as a Democrat. So, the stuff that's going on, some of the leaks that Trump can't really control are from his own son-in-law, from Jared Kushner, who's, rich Democrat, friends with all the Goldman Sachs bankers, and him and Ivanka are being wined and dined by all the rich Silicon Valley technology limousine liberal Democrats. So, Ivanka's gaining valuable insights and experience, and I think, she's probably going to try to run in 12 years or something like that and be the first female president. But I want to talk more about, the plans that Trump has. He said the dollar's too strong. He still wants to get some of these plans passed. I think what most people didn't realize is how corrupt the whole system here in DC is. People thought, oh, Trump can come in here, fire a few guys, and, within 6 months, things would be a lot better. Things are entrenched here. You really have to live here and understand and talk with people who work in government agencies to understand how things work. So it's going to take Trump at least 2 or 3 years to get any of these watered down versions of things passed. The other thing, Phil, is how will Trump pay for a lot of these programs he wants? What's your opinion on how he's going to pay for some of these things?
Well, I think this is exactly why he's saying he likes Yellen. He's going to pay for it the way they always do, by inflating our currency supply. They're going to do it through the most covert method possible, and that's inflation. Stealing the value of our hard-earned money just incrementally. And I think we'll eventually have QE4. We've probably had it surreptitiously for a while now, but there'll eventually be a stated QE4, and it'll be bigger than all the other ones combined. They'll bring interest rates back to zero again. And I just don't see any other way. I mean, we've been talking about this for years. We've used all the different cliches. We're painted into a corner. We've kicked the can down the road, and they're all still true. So, it's funny. I think they got his mind right out of the gate. I don't know if your audience remembers some of the footage of his first meeting with Obama at the White House, but the man was sitting there with, his fingers steepled, and he looked as if he had seen a ghost. I don't know what they told him that day, or what rite of passage there is, but you almost think there's probably some command center beneath the White House where like they have the real factual economic data down to the penny, and it just shows how poorly we are performing fiscally and monetarily. Lawrence Kolikoff says like the real debt of the United States is close to $200 trillion or something like that. It's probably even worse. I mean, when you look at just how we frivolously spend money, a $16 million bomb here, another bunch, to the tune of $60 million there. And it's like nobody even bats an eyelash, right? And this just happens every day. So to answer your question, I think we're just going to continue with debt monetization, quantitative easing, artificially low interest rates, and government programs that really don't help the economy but are actually hurting us and taking us all backwards.
And devaluing the dollar is not really going to solve anything either. That's the Keynesian economics mercantilism version that all these other countries are all trying to do. And then you start, in addition to potential currency wars, you start a trade war. And the other thing that worries me is if Trump, to fund some of these spending programs, in addition to the Federal Reserve, either manipulating interest rates back lower or printing off more money for him, is putting a VAT tax, a 15 to 20% VAT tax on everything you and me buy or anything that's imported from the border to border adjustment tax. I mean, if he passes that in the next couple of years, you're going to see the economy really slow down. So, people are arguing now whether or not the U.S. is in a recession. Look at the Atlanta Fed GDP, how much it's been revised. I think it was projected to be over 3% GDP growth for this quarter of 2017, first quarter, and it's been revised to 0.6, enormous drop. Imagine what would happen if everyone's paying 15 to 20% more for goods that they buy every day.
Right. Yep. And granted, that Atlanta Fed number, that's coming, again, from the Federal Reserve, or at least a member bank. It's probably even worse, right?
Well, the Atlanta Fed is kind of viewed now as outside. I'm sure they're getting phone calls now that yelling like, "What are you doing? Saying revising all these numbers and they're not in consensus and blah 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 blah." I mean, the St. Louis Fed has been putting out some statistics. I forget the exact ones, but it upset Bernanke and others in the past. So there's a few, rascal Federal Reserve ones who are occasionally putting out some real stuff. Obviously, it's not like John Williams or Shadow Stats numbers, or it's not. Have you seen Ed Butowski, the Chapwood Inflation Index one? He says that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he says that inflation in the D.C. area is 12% now per year for the last 5 years.
I believe it. I mean, since I live here, I can definitely feel it. I had some anecdotal stories I can share an hour later if you like, but I mean, you definitely feel it. It's tough to raise a family here. And again, as I say on my show, and I know your show is the same, obviously it's a bit DC centric, but it applies to everyone across the fruited plain, right? Because this is their nation's capital. This is where wealth is being siphoned off, and they really should be angry about it. So they need to hear these reminders about how their wealth is being spent.
Amen. This is where most of the parasites live, ladies and gentlemen, although they also live, in the municipality levels and other state capitals as well. But, at the federal level, this is where, the really high-level crime bosses like Hillary Clinton and others get away with, billions of dollars in theft.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. Donald Trump said it during his campaigns. He's like, do you think this many people would be showing up to my rallies if the economy was good? And he was right. That was one of the things he said that was spot on. And people have been hurting. They were hurting under the Obama administration for 8 long years. I mean, this is the longest supposed recovery that we've ever had, and people aren't doing any better. I mean, unemployment is just as bad. The real cost of living has been soaring. So they felt it. They went to the polls in droves, and they said, hey, why not vote for this reality television star and businessman? Let's just take a shot on him because, what do we have to lose? And, meanwhile, the D.C. elite, the Hollywood elite, the Manhattan elite were totally shocked because they didn't know a single person in their circle of friends who voted for Trump. And that's because they're the beneficiaries of all this Keynesian economic policy. So I think, a lot of people now in Washington have recovered from the shock of a Trump presidency. And now that they're seeing the DC power brokers get Trump's mind right, they're even more comfortable. And they're living high on the hog. It's the roaring 20s here. People are still buying $1 million homes and getting all the upgrades, stainless steel appliances, granite countertops. We're building out infrastructure here that is completely unnecessary.
Well,
And,
Ashburn has grown, like Loudoun County and Ashburn is so developed now from what it was even a couple years ago. I think I went to that Ashburn shopping area, the outdoor one Ashburn Place, and that thing's unbelievable how quickly it was built.
Yeah, I would encourage your audience as you're listening to this interview, if you're not driving, go and look at One Loudoun. Just type One Loudoun into Google. There's like a driving range there that looks like it's out of the future or from another planet. I mean, it's like a double, triple decker thing. It's from Top Golf or whatever, and I don't know what an evening there costs. And then across the road, you have all these restaurants and bars, and there was even one time a plan to put in a semi-pro soccer team there, and there's condominiums, and all of this is just completely the result of a misallocation of resources, artificially low interest rates, and the roaring 20s that we have here in D.C. But, you and I understand, and this is why we're friends, because it's so rare to find somebody here in the D.C. area who understands real economics. We understand that people around the country are really hurting. I mean, I have family who live in, upstate New York and Georgia and, the Midwest, and they're not doing so well. And it's because they're paying for the lifestyle that everyone in Northern Virginia and Montgomery County and Washington, D.C. are getting to enjoy. And, obviously you and I are beneficiaries of that because we happen to live here, but it's sad. I wanted to tell you a story. I still live in Ashburn, and I used to live in a community called Brambleton. And my wife and I owned a townhome there. We moved in January 2008, okay? It was like a scene right out of The Big Short. There were like my neighbors had pit bulls that were urinating all over their deck. Those pit bulls eventually had puppies. The neighbor next door, one day he pulled me aside and turned out he had paid over $200,000 more for his townhome, which was exactly like mine, only 2 years earlier. Another funny thing was a third neighbor the night we're moving in. They didn't even have blinds on their windows, so my wife and I saw something that you're not supposed to see your neighbors up to, So I'm just trying to paint a picture, right? Like you had people buying $500,000 homes who probably, this was like the nicest home they had ever lived in their entire life because no one cared, right? They were just willing to give them the money and, the move in, no money down, ninja loans, right? Like a scene right out of The Big Short. Now, Brambleton had a plan to build $1 million townhomes right in front of their movie theater, surrounded by the finest restaurants. They had plans to build a library, but unfortunately the 2008 financial crisis intervened and they weren't able to complete this project. So this land sat vacant for 8 or 9 years until now, Jason. Now I'm finding out from a realtor who I'm friends with, he's selling $1 million townhomes that have elevators in them. They're 4 floors. They're built right in front of this movie theater, surrounded by shops, and the bubble is basically back in full swing. What they could not accomplish under Alan Greenspan, they've now managed to achieve under Bernanke and Yellen and Obama. So, I hope that just paints a picture for the audience. It just goes to show you really how distorted our economy is. I have no doubt that many of these homes will be foreclosed in the years to come. And, there's going to be fire sale prices on some of these places. So, if you're in the Northern Virginia area or, anywhere in the U.S., stay patient. I think there's going to be a lot of deals coming out down the road. Obviously, we've probably been patient for a while. It's like, well, how much longer do we need to wait? It'll be worth the wait. Trust me, especially if you're following the advice you hear on Wall Street from Main Street. It's definitely going to pay off.
Yeah, and you've taken pictures before and shared them on your Facebook. I've seen you and your brother have of the amount of construction cranes in the DC metro area. It's pervasive. Whether you're in Montgomery County, the nicest one out of Maryland, right outside of DC, or you're in downtown DC with like pretty much almost all buildings are being knocked down and turned into luxury condos or brand new hotels. Or you're in Northern Virginia, they're crossing the bridge, and you're in Arlington and Clarendon. Clarendon 15 years ago used to be a very dangerous neighborhood, and now they've turned it into ultra expensive, ultra luxury, and they put a lot of expensive condos and houses there, but now the restaurants that have been in there a while, they can't afford the rent increases that the central planners there have levied on them with extra taxes and things. So a lot of restaurants are going out of business. So, this misallocation of capital, it is very apparent here in Washington, D.C., more than other areas, I would say, because there's just so many people who are desperate to move here from so many other different states in the United States, desperate to get a government job. So that kind of keeps the thing going a lot longer than it should. All this added demand that people are willing to come here, and if something drops a little bit, this is probably why we haven't had a full real estate bust here. I think even during 2008, Phil, a lot of real estate prices, the average real estate price only dropped 10% in the Northern Virginia area during the 2008 crash. And that's because a lot of real estate investors, when they saw the prices drop here, they went and did all cash deals to come in here and buy from all over the country and the world because they figured the government bubble would just be reinflated again.
And they were right.
They're right for now.
Look no further. Yeah, they're right for now. Let's face it. I have friends and family that say, Phil, gosh, why do you have to put horns on everything, right? Why can't you just enjoy life? Well, because I go around, I'm looking for these contrarian indicators, and I look at something like the DC Metro stretching all the way out to Loudoun County, or, the bridge overpass project on Route 7 that I agree has been needed for quite some time, but is only achievable with 0% interest rates, right? There's a reason why these projects commenced now or in recent years, right? This was the only time that it would have been possible. So,
well, maybe, but those things are going to be way overpriced. They were probably done with unbidded contracts by one company with bribes to politicians. I've heard the stories from my friends who work in the real estate business around here of how you have to bribe people to get shit done. So, it's just unfortunate. It's like that in a lot of major cities, whether in Boston or New York City, pretty much the same way. People have brought up how Trump was corrupt with this and that in real estate. Well, in order to build almost any commercial buildings in New York City in the 1970s and 80s, the construction companies, the politicians, the unions, bribes had to be done to get anything done. So people just don't understand the level of corruption and pervasiveness. It would be nice to live in a world where people didn't have to bribe people, and government employees who were overseeing permitting would do their jobs efficiently and not ask for bribes or anything like that. But that's not the world we live in now. We live in a world where not only is there corruption in certain parts of the private sector, there's also a lot of corruption in government as well. I just think, it's pervasive, and a lot of the reason it's pervasive, it goes back to this, the money is corrupted. The money is just so corrupted, people can't earn a decent living. People are having to look for corners to cut or ways to cheat. And I think that starts with, how capitalism has been perverted, and central banking and big government and all these other things.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Especially in DC, a lot of people are doing pretend work for pretend money. But I think there will come a day, it was more pronounced in places like Vegas, where you literally saw hotels that were half completed during the 2008 financial crisis and the months and years subsequent to it.
Trump
I think
had
there
one.
will come.
Did you see the Trump hotel in Vegas? Yeah, he converted it from a hotel to condos, I think, right? The one in Vegas?
Oh, that doesn't surprise me. But, I'm on record as telling, I didn't put this in my book, but I'll say it on your show. I do think there will come a day, probably before, I don't know, 2030, where you will have ghost neighborhoods in parts of Northern Virginia. I really think that day will come, because eventually when the government bubble bursts and the jobs go away, people just aren't going to be able to afford to live here, and they won't have the job to live here anyway, right? I mean, you already mentioned people move from all over the country to DC because that's where the jobs are. But I think there will come a day where you won't be able to sell some of these condos and townhomes and you'll just have, every other home. It probably won't be as bad as Detroit, at least not by 2030, but there will come a day where it'll be no different than China, and there's just no real demand for all of the infrastructure and residential communities that have been put up around here.
You know where a lot of the demand for a lot of U.S. real estate has been coming from, Phil? It's been coming from people in other countries where things are even worse or more oppressed, or the economy never really recovered since 2008. The demand has been coming from rich or middle class people in China, Asia, the Middle East are buying up a lot of real estate, and Europe. So people have been moving from those countries where there's a lot of corruption and social problems and other things to the U.S. because it's viewed as relatively either less taxes, relatively either less corrupt, or relatively safer than to park money. Eventually, though, if all these central bankers keep printing enough money, people are going to begin to question the credibility of central bankers. But I want to ask you now, Phil, about these surveys. We were talking about this before we started recording a couple days ago. Zero Hedge has been running this, but these are mainstream financial media stories from MarketWatch and other places. Multiple surveys are showing that 33% to 50% of Americans now can't even write a check for a $500 emergency. More than 62%, according to another survey, of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings in their account. How are people going to be able to even survive in this environment where, government and big business and Wall Street are siphoning off more and more, and it seems inflation and taxes are going up? What are some tips for personal finance, since I know you wrote your book, Financial Judo, for people to maybe either save money or grow their income?
Well, we have to get back to our American roots. We have to become a nation again where we depend on self-reliance and rugged individualism. No one's going to help bail you out. You have to take care of yourself. And really, it's up to you to create your own insurance policy, right? You're the one who saves before you spend. You build an emergency fund. If you lost your job, you could manage to look for one for, say, 6 months and still make ends meet. But that's impossible to do if 2/3 of Americans don't have $1,000 saved, right? And what's, I think, even more disturbing is something like 25% of Americans who are retirement aged only have like $10,000 or less. I mean, these are people that really were fooled by the Social Security Ponzi scheme. They really were led to believe, hey, you were paying premiums and this is going to be here to take care of you and you're going to retire with dignity. That's not the case. That's why you have geriatric people on United Airlines flights waiting on you instead of, the young pretty women that you normally see in the advertisements. These people, they're struggling financially and they're not able to retire with dignity. So I think we all just need to lose this lie, right? We all need to face the reality. You need to take care of yourself. There is no such thing as a free lunch. The state of New York has recently come out with quote unquote free college, right? Nothing is as expensive as what government gives you for free. And I'm sure that those degrees they give out will be worth what they spent on it. Absolutely nothing.
There's all those conditions on the free college. You have to stay in the state for X amount of years. They're trying to tax, higher net worth people more money. But we all know how it works. If they increase taxes enough, or government, like in China, tries to do a currency devaluation of 6% overnight, people who have common sense, they're not libertarian or Austrian school necessarily, but they at least have common sense. They're not going to sit back there and let government, tax them or devalue their currency and savings, continually do this. People are going to adapt. And I think these government central planners, they believe in ideology and theories and stupid textbooks that were written a long time ago, that basically that they can keep, increasing, especially around here, property taxes, Phil, that they can keep increasing property taxes or keep raising people's rents, and that they will find someone to pay and it's not a problem. But there's going to be real world backlash to this behavior by bureaucrats and central planners and politicians.
Yeah, well, even liberals and Keynesians respond the way you would expect them to when these, draconian tax measures are instituted. They leave just like everybody else.
Yep.
They go to where the places where they can keep what they earn. And that's why if you look at a state migration map, the first 10 years of this millennium, it was, the typical places that you would expect. California and New York are losing more people, and Texas and Florida are gaining them. People go to where incentives are, and they think they may be able to give college for free, but after maybe a couple years of this, they're going to realize, oh, you know what? Actually, it's not working. It's going to work as well as Obamacare, the Unaffordable Care Act did. So it's going to flop on its face. And even if you do get a degree, you're just going to end up as a barista anyway. So, why waste your time? Maybe, you go start your own little coffee shop and turn that into something worthwhile instead of wasting your time in a college classroom, learning something that really has no application to the real world. I think, they're going to find this out the hard way. But yeah, I mean, it's all about self-reliance. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Everything maybe your great grandparent or grandparent who grew up in the Depression talked about, that's all still true. Unfortunately, though, we have most people still making the wrong decision, financing cars 7-8 years out. Credit card debt recently hit over $1 trillion. So we have a day of reckoning coming. It's going to be up to your listeners who are smart and doing the right thing with their money to teach their friends and loved ones, what to do and direct them to places, free information like my book, Financial Judo, that you can get on my website to get back on the right track. But unfortunately, most Americans have been sold a bill of goods. They think government's going to take care of them. They're going to find out yet again in this third and final bubble that that is absolutely not the case.
There's a lot of hard and painful truths coming. There's a lot more inflation and taxes coming. I think stagflation is going to increase, whether any of his plans are successful or not. There's a bunch of different ways I see stagflation coming, and a lot more inflation in the global supply chain as well. But, you mentioned the free things. I mean, free healthcare in Canada, free healthcare in England and a lot of Europe. Those people, maybe there's some good stories about the healthcare being good for certain people, but I've also heard a lot of horror stories from people who need operations and surgeries and don't get them, end up dying, or they're with a lot of pain, or they have to leave the country anyway and pay their own dime to get the surgery in time to save their life. And, in addition to that, in those countries, people there are paying, in Canada, I think they're paying 53% flat tax on income tax. So in exchange for your, quote, air quotes, free healthcare in Canada, you're paying a 53% flat income tax no matter on how much you earn. And, I have friends in Toronto who told me they wish they could move down here in the United States, but their jobs are up there. So they wish they could pay a lot less taxes, but they're kind of stuck there. So, life's all about trade-offs. That's what economics is about, trade-offs and trying to, weigh decisions and figure things out. But the politicians are making things difficult to do that anymore, especially, if when Trump's gone, if it's back to the globalist business as normal, with negative interest rates and charging people on money on bank accounts and capital controls and all these other things. So I think Trump may have delayed these things for a little bit, but, we know that they want to do these things, that's the plan. So we'll see how long these things are delayed for. I think, Trump has bought a little bit of time for people to prepare and adapt to some of the things that Phil has discussed here today. Phil, what's your opinion then on the corruption then in D.C. with the Susan Rice and Obama scandal?
Wow. Well, nothing surprises me anymore. Let's face it. We have had, gosh, I could rattle off a number of things. Fast and Furious. We had the Servergate scandal. We had Corzine and MF Global, and what he ended up paying, like $5 million to get out of jail free card. The rule of law is dead in this country. And frankly, that's why I'm doing Kennedy Financial with my brother. The writing's on the wall. And once the rule of law is dead and it doesn't apply equally to every American, then collapse is to follow soon after. Yep. And, when you see something, even an incoming president, right, quote unquote wiretap, that was his language, but still the deep state being used against political enemies, the IRS scandal, using the IRS as a weapon against your political enemies. This is truly disturbing. It's not the United States our founding fathers envisioned. These are true psychopaths at the top of a power structure within our government. And, it's really sad. The good people, they're never given a chance. they changed the rules on someone like Ron Paul so that they don't have a chance. Really,
Yeah,
I
Bernie
don't have,
Sanders too. Yeah, Bernie
yeah,
Sanders should have won the primary over Hillary Clinton for the Democrats, and Ron Paul was screwed over by the Republicans. Yeah, both of them.
right. So, you know, pretty much, again, I'll harken back to what I said earlier. Why can't you just go around and ignore these things and be happy and enjoy Disney World and, Christmas time and Easter and everything? Well, because we have a bunch of psychopaths running everything, and we all need to protect ourselves. They run the currency, they run our government, and it's really scary how, month by month, year by year, we're seeing our country worse than it was before. And it's clear that we are no different than Rome, and the consequences will be the same. But that's frankly, I'm not an expert on the Susan Rice situation. All I'm saying is that I'm so cynical and disgusted that nothing would surprise me anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, when you have this much corruption and the rule of law, like you said, is in jeopardy, and the justice system is anything but just, it's not fair. If you have the right political connections or the right amount of money, you can get off of murder and all these other corruption charges. There's so many to list. I think George Soros should be in prison, or his assets in the United States should be seized, all the stuff that he's done as well. But that makes me, you brought up how people shouldn't be happy at these things. I think people can find a balance, at least somewhat of a balance, where they can still be happy at those things, but they should still, with their common sense and rational brain, they should realize that, well, the government's going to change the rules. They're going to either devalue the currency again some way, somehow, if they don't get as much inflation as they want, like FDR did in 1933. So I should not save all my savings in fiat currency. Although maybe you should have some cash in case like the real estate prices drop and then there's a good time to buy. But don't keep all your savings in fiat currency cash, and definitely have some physical gold and silver outside the system. So I think there's some type of balance there where they can still keep a somewhat positive entrepreneurial attitude, but still being more realistic about what's happening in reality and trying to apply a libertarian or free market Austrian lens. I think the one thing that libertarians, we get accused of being too bearish. But, we notice, I think, corruption from both political parties more. And, one thing that libertarians don't do enough, I read a good article from hedge fund manager Kevin Duffy of Bearing Asset Management, is that there's been still, in spite of all this corruption over the years from politics, there's been a lot of good technology advances that have made people's lives more efficient or easier to connect. You and me are having a very cheap phone call right now, and the call quality is still pretty good. And, we have a very powerful computer now in our pocket and smartphones. And this, to a certain extent, it's offset some of the inflation that is going up in our rent, our food, our healthcare, our utilities. So there are some things to be positive about still in our lives.
No, I agree. But what I will say, if I'm allowed to offer a rebuttal, this is something we talk about on my show all the time. It's so common. I'm sure your audience can think of at least several people. If you bring up the public schools, they're like, oh, our public schools, the teachers, the principal, the superintendent, they're just all so good. They're so nice and everyone's learning. And it's like, okay, you're telling me your public school is good, but in comparison to what? Why is it that American students think so highly of themselves when it comes to math and science? And in reality, we have some of the poorest students in the world, and that's given all the resources that they have, right? So this kind of principle applies to a lot of things. Sure, we're talking over Skype. Sure, we're recording. Sure, Uber's come up with driverless cars, and there may be drones coming out soon that'll be taxis, and that'll help me get to work. But relative to where we should be, right? Relative to where we started. The Industrial Revolution, building the greatest economy the world had ever known. And we were so far ahead of the game. If we had just continued on that track, where would we be now, right? Like, Why are we still going to work 5 days out of the week, right?
Yep.
Why is it that we're all loaded up with student loan debt? We have a mortgage long before we buy a house. We're not doing anywhere near as well as we should be. So even though we can point to these things, hey, well, you know what, you can get LASIK surgery and your eyes are better. And hey, if you're not happy with your nose, you can get plastic surgery. And, hey, you can still go enjoy a movie and it's not as as expensive as you would think it would be, and you can watch it on an IMAX. And hey, look, Elon Musk has plans to rocket people to the moon. Yeah, this is all great. I'm just saying, we're still in debt up to our eyeballs. We're working way too much. We don't produce anything, and that's really my argument. We are way behind where we should have been, and that's because we've lost libertarian principles. We remove sound money. We depend on a central bank for quantitative easing. We're so far off track, and we've really spun our wheels for a long time. And that's just all. That's where I'm coming from. This is what people routinely hear on my podcast over at Kennedy Financial.
I'm actually in agreement with you. So I was just bringing up the counterpoint there about technology that libertarians accuse of being too bearish. So I think, that's why a lot of libertarians say, oh, hyperinflation is guaranteed, it's coming around the corner. So I've been a stagflationist now for a while. And I think one of the reasons we've had stagflation instead of hyperinflation, there's a number of reasons. But one of them is because technology has offset to a certain extent some of the inflation, because it's lowered some of the costs. But
You're right.
Things should be a lot better. You're definitely right about that. Globalist John D. Rockefeller, the oldest Rockefeller, he said he wanted to end capitalism and competition when he started, funding all these government agencies and paying for all these studies to get done to expand the government. So, I think we can be an entrepreneurial country again. I think people are going to be forced to, really, to survive. That's just going to be how things are. A lot of people are not going to be comfortable with that. But, I hear all the time, people who don't know anything about economics or business. I hear ladies at the grocery store when I'm getting checked out. There, like you said, there's older people working at these jobs that normally were entry level. There's an older lady at the grocery store, and I buy, a smoothie with kale and spinach and pineapple juice in it with a protein scoop. And the lady was complaining how the price got in the last couple weeks. The price has risen an extra $2 on the same thing. I was trying to explain her inflation, and she didn't understand it. She's like, "They just greedy" and all this stuff. So it's very difficult because people don't learn. It starts with the educational system, and I think it's done intentional, Phil. People don't learn entrepreneurship. They don't learn about the Federal Reserve. They don't learn about sound money. They don't learn about inflation. They don't even learn how to balance a checkbook. So when they get to college, they get tricked by the credit card companies into signing up for 4 credit cards in exchange for those stupid little gifts. And then they have extra debt in addition to their student loan debt that they can't declare bankruptcy on.
Right. Well, that's the sad news, but the good news is there's always going to be a place for you and your show and me and my show, because we have a lot of work to do in order to unwind the total lack of financial education in our schooling system.
Yes, and unlike Lloyd Blankfein, I think we're actually doing God's work. So.
Agreed.
Okay, well, Phil, I just want to thank you again for your time. I really recommend your show. You do a really good job with the content. You have a cool new intro, and you managed to get Ron Paul on before I did, and you've passed 100 episodes now. So congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It's not easy. I've been talking to you offline about this. I think I entered the game when it started to get difficult with YouTube and Google. It's really been hard to get our name out there. I still say we have the best YouTube channel under 1,000 subscribers. So definitely check it out and subscribe, because we could use the support.
Yeah, I agree. You should have a lot more subscribers for sure, but I've shared this with you. YouTube and Google are out to get us. I'm shadow banned on Twitter, so people who follow me don't even see my tweets. So it's difficult out there. The big rich Democrats who run these large technology companies who are trying to spin Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner to get extra favors from President Trump. They're just going after people like us. They don't like libertarians. They don't like people who call them out on their lies, call them hypocrites. They don't like any gold or silver people. It's just really sad that the mainstream media, they're trying to do whatever they can to keep the mainstream media from becoming a dinosaur and going extinct.
Well, that's why it still feels good that we're actually getting some traction. People are still thirsty for the truth, and they're finding the materials that we're putting out there. And we will win in the long run. We definitely have an uphill battle, but if you're out there and you're trying to do the same thing, don't get discouraged. In the long run, we will win because we have the truth on our side.
Yeah, I don't like the Keynes saying, John Maynard Keynes he says like in the long run we're all dead, so you may as well do what you want right now. That allows for a lot of inexcusable behaviors, and if you studied the stuff Keynes got away with, he was a pedo before.
Right.
Anyways though, I think that we should wrap up the show with that. I want to thank you again for your time today, Phil, and our listeners should definitely go check out your podcast. Your shows though are an hour, or are they all still an hour now?
Yeah, they usually go from 45 minutes to an hour. We almost always have a guest. Most recent guest was Bill Murphy. We talked about gold and silver manipulation, and the podcast came out for that yesterday, and the video will be out on Sunday. Every Sunday at noon, we put out a video.
Excellent. And definitely go check out Phil's interview with Ron Paul. It was quite good. It should have a lot more views than it does right now. And thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a good Easter weekend.
Yep, you too, Jason. They can find all my work at philip.kennedy.com, philipkennedy.com.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.